Recognizing the member for Langley-Willowbrook.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's always an honor to be able to get up in this House and debate different bills. And I just want to thank the member from Abbotsford South for doing an amazing job and for speaking for 2 hours. And I also want to thank my colleague from Surrey White Rock for bringing in this hoist motion earlier today. Today I want to take this time to talk a bit more on the hoist motion that has been brought forward for amendment to second reading on Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Amendment Act 2026. The motion for second reading of Bill 9 be amended by deleting the word now and substituting it with 6 months hence. At first glance, this amendment may appear moderate. It does not reject the bill, nor does it attempt to halt the legislative process altogether. It does not deny debate, nor does it prevent this House from alternating making any kind of decisions. What it asks for is something far more measured, and I would argue far more reasonable. It asks for time, Madam Speaker. Time to reflect, time to listen, and time to ensure that what we pass in this chamber is worthy of the principles it is meant to be upheld. This is not a procedural delay. This is not an obstruction. This is necessary pause, a pause rooted in responsibility, a pause grounded in respect for the people of British Columbians, Madam Speaker, and a pause that reflects the seriousness of what is at stake. Bill 9 is not simple. It's not another piece of bill moving through the routine processes of this House. It is not an administrative housekeeping, nor is it a minor technical adjustment that can be addressed without deeper consideration. It speaks directly to the relationship between government and the public, Madam Speaker. It shapes how information is accessed, how decisions are scrutinized, and how accountability is exercised in practice. In that sense, it is not just about process, it is about principle. As I said earlier in my debate, freedom of information does not belong to government. It belongs to the citizens it seeks to serve here in BC. And that principle is not new. It is rooted in the very foundation of democracy itself, Madam Speaker. The idea that government is accountable to the people, that authority is not owned, it is entrusted, that those who govern do so on behalf of the public, not above them. Access to information is one of the clearest expressions of that principle. Madam Speaker, it is how citizens see decisions being made, not simply after the fact, but in the way that allows them to understand the reasoning behind those decisions. It is how they understand how the public resources are made and used. It is how they hold institutions to account. And yet, Madam Speaker, I cannot count the number of times I hear from people in my community of Langley-Willowbrook who say, my voices don't matter. That's why this motion is important. They feel decisions are made without them. They feel the system moves forward, whether they are heard or not, Madam Speaker. And that is why this moment matters. Because pausing now, choosing to take that time to listen, to reflect, and to get this right, sends a different message, Madam Speaker. It signals that their voices do matter, that their concerns are not an afterthought, that this House is willing to hear them before moving forward. Without access, accountability weakens. Without accountability, trust erodes. And without trust, democracy itself begins to fracture, Madam Speaker. So when we change access to information, laws, even in the small ways, we are not simply adjusting process, we are reshaping the relationship between government and the public. We are redefining how power is seen, how it is questioned, and ultimately, how it is held to account. Why 6 months matters, Madam Speaker. The question before us is simple. Why 6 months? Why not proceed now? The answer is equally simple. Because we are not ready. This is not a partisan statement. It is an observation grounded, and that's the government's own actions prove that. The minister has already brought forward amendments to this bill during the course of this debate already. That alone tells us something very important, Madam Speaker. It tells us that the bill originally introduced was not completely, thoroughly thought through. It tells us that the concerns raised in this House and across this province were very valid and require response. It tells us that even now, that the government is still adjusting its approach. If this bill were as clear and as precise, as well as understood as the minister suggests, we would not be seeing amendments mid-debate. So the question becomes, if the government recognizes the need for change, is it unwilling to recognize the need for time? Amendments do not solve the problem, Madam Speaker. Let us be very clear on that. The amendments have been brought forward do not address the core concerns with this bill. They move language. They adjust structure. They do not resolve the underlying issues. Clause 2 still leaves critical decisions in the hands of the head of the public body without clear definition. Clause 3, even with proposed removal, highlights confusion in the drafting itself, Madam Speaker. And Clause 13 continues to expand the ability to deny requests using terms that remain undefined, abusive, malicious, unreasonable, broad, interference. None of these have any sort of definition within the bill. These are not minor wording issues, Madam Speaker. These are powerful optional tools. And when those tools are not clearly defined, they create uncertainty. And uncertainty in access to information does not benefit the public, Madam Speaker. It benefits the institution holding that information, and that is the NDP government right now. So let us not pretend that these amendments fix the problem. They do not. They reinforce the need for pause, and that is why we brought in this hoist motion today for an extension for 6 months for revision. Here are examples of how these terms, if left undefined or loosely written, can be translated in ways that can cause real harm, Madam Speaker. Abusive could be understood as a requester who files multiple requests or follows up a journalist asking repeated questions on the same issue, or a citizen seeking clarification after incomplete answers could be labeled as abusive, simple for being persistent. The risk there, Madam Speaker, legitimate scrutiny gets discouraged, and people are penalized for holding the government to account. Malicious could be translated as intent rather than behavior, Madam Speaker. A request that is politically inconvenient, critical by government, or tied to an investigation could be framed as malicious, even when it is entirely legitimate. The risk there, Madam Speaker, motive becomes a tool to deny access, allowing subjective judgment to override a citizen's right to know and get the information they need. Unreasonable broad could be understood based on the capacity of the public body, rather than the nature of the request. A request covering a wide time frame or multiple departments could be rejected, not because it lacks merit, but because it requires effort, Madam Speaker. The risk there, complex or systematic issues become harder to investigate, especially when they require a broader scope to understand fully. Interference could be interpreted as anything that creates pressure, workload, or inconvenience. A request that exposes internal decision-making, requires coordination, or arrives during a busy period could be seen as interfering with operations. Madam Speaker, we know how things get busy in this House, but that could be referred to as interfering with regular operations. The risk there, Madam Speaker, the threshold for refusal becomes tied to operational comfort rather than public interest. Why does all this matter? Madam Speaker, when these terms are not clearly defined in this bill? Decisions shift from objective standards to subject understanding. Power rests within the institution holding the information, which is this government. Madam Speaker, citizens are left uncertain about their rights. Transparency becomes inconsistency. In practice, this creates a chilling effect, Madam Speaker. People stop asking. Journalists narrow their scope. Organizations hesitate to pursue accountability. And over time, access to information does not disappear outright. It simply becomes harder, slower, and more uncertain. That is how trust erodes. Madam Speaker, in 2022 Special Committee report, we do not have to guess what good reform looks like. We already have a roadmap. In the 2022, the Special Committee to Review the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act brought forward a comprehensive report, a report grounded in consultation, a report built on evidence, a report focused on strengthening transparency and accountability. And yet, here we are debating this bill that does not fully reflect that work, that does not uphold anything that was reported in that 2022 Special Committee review. A 6-month extension would allow this House to properly align Bill 9 with those recommendations, Madam Speaker, ensuring that the changes we make are consistent with the evidence and the consultation that have already taken place during that 2022 Special Committee reports. Not selectively, not partially, but meaningfully, Madam Speaker, because modernization should not be rushed. It should be right. And we're already seeing with those amendments brought forward by the minister that things are not right with this bill. Modernization is very important, but it must be done carefully, Madam Speaker. It must be done in a way that strengthens the system rather than introducing new uncertainties. We need to listen to British Columbians, Madam Speaker. This debate is not happening in isolation. Thousands of British Columbians have expressed concerns about this bill. A few weeks ago, I tabled a petition with over 10,000 signatures from BC citizens. Their concerns came from the Canadian Taxpayers Federations. They got these signatures within a week before I tabled them. We need to listen to those stakeholders. We need to listen to those citizens. We need to understand their concerns regarding this bill. Journalists, advocacy organizations, Indigenous communities, legal experts, and everyday citizens. They are confused. Thousands of British Columbians have expressed concerns about this bill. They are not confused. They are not misunderstood. They are very much engaged, Madam Speaker, and they are asking those hard questions. They're asking for something that is very reasonable. Time to be heard. Time to understand how these changes will affect them. Time to provide input before decisions are finalized. A 6-month pause creates space for that, Madam Speaker, because when bills that affect public rights should not move faster than the public understanding. Madam Speaker, trust is built through process. This bill raises important questions about transparency. But Madam Speaker, how we pass this bill is just as important as what is inside of it. If we move forward too quickly despite unresolved concerns, despite incomplete alignment with prior recommendations from the Special Committee in 2022, despite ongoing amendments and incomplete alignment with the prior work, we send a message that processes does not matter, that speed is being prioritized over substance. And that message is that process does not matter, Madam Speaker, but process does matter. Because trust is not built by saying we're transparent, it is built by demonstrating it. A 6-month delay is not a sign of weakness, Madam Speaker. It is a demonstration of confidence. Confidence that this bill can withstand scrutiny, which will strengthen this bill. Confidence is that input will improve it when we listen to our stakeholders, when we listen to BC citizens that can bring up their concerns. Confidence is that getting things right matters more than getting things done quickly. Madam Speaker, this is the government's position. The minister has stated that the bill maintains strong access to information, that it does not change timelines, and it does not restrict legislative requests. If this is true, Madam Speaker, then there should be no concern with taking additional time, because strong legislation does not fear review. Strong legislation welcomes it. So again, the question becomes, if there is nothing to fix, why were there amendments needed? Why did the minister table amendments mid-debate? And if amendments were needed, why is more time not justified, Madam Speaker? Real-world impact requires careful work. Madam Speaker, earlier in the debate, we spoke about how even small changes in language can have real-world consequences. As my colleagues have given many examples, we spoke about timing, we spoke about access, and we spoke about accountability. Those impacts do not happen in theory. They happen to real people, Madam Speaker. A parent seeking answers. A parent files a request to understand why their child's special education support was reduced mid-year. We've been seeing this right now with autism funding. A lot of parents have a lot of concerns and are trying to access information through FOI. They are told the responses will come without delay. Unreasonable delay. Weeks pass, Madam Speaker, then months. By the time the records arrive, the school year is nearly over. The opportunity to advocate is gone. That child has already gone without support, Madam Speaker, and a decision that could have been challenged in real time is now a simple fact that cannot be undone. Another example, Madam Speaker, a journalist investigating public spending. A journalist uncovers early signs of a cost overturn on a major infrastructure project funded by taxpayers. They file a request for internal communication and decisions record. The response is delayed. Not denied, but delayed. Just delayed. In that time, that project moves forward. Contracts are extended. Public messaging is set. By the time the documents are released, Madam Speaker, the story has passed its moment. What would have been front-page accountability becomes a retroactive article. What could have triggered scrutiny becomes footnote. Madam Speaker, and the public loses the chance to ask questions when it mattered the most. A business trying to understand procurement decisions. A small local company believes a government contract was awarded under unclear critic. They request documentations to understand how the decision was made. The response comes after next round of contracts has already been issued, Madam Speaker. They miss their chance to adjust, compete, or challenge the process. Larger players continue to dominate, and the confidence and fairness begins to erode. Why this all matters, Madam Speaker? Delay is not neutral. It shifts outcomes. It limits action. It reduces accountability in the moment when it matters the most, Madam Speaker. And that is exactly why this cannot be rushed. And that is exactly why the member from Surrey White Rock has put in this hoist motion to make sure that we have the 6 months to understand, to make sure that this bill is thoroughly examined, and we have discussions with different stakeholders and citizens put in their input, and their concerns are actually being reviewed and seen. That is why what 6 months allows us. A 6-month extension would allow for meaningful consultations with stakeholders, Madam Speaker, proper review and implementation of the 2022 Special Committee recommendations that haven't been taken into consideration with this bill right now. Clear definitions to be developed and debated, Madam Speaker. The alignment between government intent and legislative language, transparency in how power will be applied. Most importantly, Madam Speaker, it allows for reflection, not just within this government, but across this House and across the province, across all British Columbians. Madam Speaker, this is not about delay. It is about responsibility. We're not asking to stop this bill. We're asking to strengthen it. We're asking to ensure that when it passes, it reflects the values it claims to uphold: transparency, accountability, and public trust. Because once this bill is passed, its effects will not be temporary. They will shape how information is accessed for years to come, Madam Speaker. That is not something we should rush. That is something we should definitely look through. I understand that the minister has also taken out Clause 3 by deleting Clause 3 and making changes to Clause 13 and making changes to Clause 2. But that's just not enough. Clearly, the minister sees flaws in this bill and sees that there's things that are of concern to citizens, and those things are not something small, because as I just mentioned, once this bill passes, it takes effects, will not be temporarily. They will become the law, and that is very worrisome for a lot of people in British Columbians that have brought their concerns forward. Madam Speaker, this amendment is simple. Replace now with 6 months hence. This amendment is simple in its wording, but majorly it is implication. It asks us to choose care over speed, reflection over assumption, and trust over convenience. In closing, Madam Speaker, but what it represents is major. It represents a decision about how we legislate. We do move quickly, or do we move carefully? Do we prioritize timelines, or do we prioritize trust? Do we assume we are right, or do we take the time to make sure we are? Freedom of information is not a technical matter. It is a democratic principle, and a democratic principle deserves careful consideration, and a democratic principle deserves the time required to uphold this government properly. 6 months is not too much to ask. We're doing this on other bills, as indicated, because we need that time. We need that time in consultations. We need that time to discuss with different stakeholders. In fact, what is given here is that given what is at stake, that is the least we can do right now, Madam Speaker. We can take that 6 months to thoroughly go over this bill and make sure that there is no flaws, make sure that we do talk to the citizens of BC, British Columbians, and we talk to the stakeholders that have concerns. Clearly, the minister had concerns with the language and clause in this bill, and that's why there was amendments that were put forward mid-debate. So I would really hope that we take this hoist motion into consideration and really have the minister and the other side take direction of what we're asking for and why we're asking for the 6 months, because we really want to make sure that every citizen is heard and their concerns are put forward, and we clearly do that consultation and make this bill stronger, not have it weaken. Thank you, Madam Speaker.